Hi, this is Mark Little. If you were in our Bitcoin for Financial Advisors webinar and you took our advice and you've committed to 100 hours of study on Bitcoin, if you're wondering why I chose 100 hours, this video is the right place to be. I'm going to walk through my recommendation for a curriculum for financial advisors on how to best invest that 100 hours so that you truly have a deep understanding of Bitcoin, which is easy to use, but under the hood, you'll have an understanding of the financial planning and other financial engineering opportunities there are for clients if and only if you understand Bitcoin and the Bitcoin network. Everybody learns differently. Some people are visual and audible learners. Other people like to read books. I've got you covered either way. My premise for this curriculum is to focus on the people who are the thought leaders in Bitcoin. Don't just go surfing around YouTube or don't just buy any old book on the topic. I'm going to give you 7 names. These are 7 individuals that I think, number one, will resonate with financial advisors because of either what their background is in our industry or they just speak in a way that is clear from a financial advisor standpoint. But also, of the 7 people, 6 of them have written the number 1 book in their area of Bitcoin. And at the end of this video, I will go back through the 7 people and tell you which books that they wrote. So if you like to read books, you'll have books. If you like to just learn by listening or hearing these authors explain concepts about Bitcoin, anything these people tell you about Bitcoin is worth learning. So you're safe. I will warn you that if you just go to YouTube and search for Bitcoin, there's all kinds of crap. There's get-rich-quick schemes and all this cryptocurrency stuff. You definitely want to invest your time focusing on the right people. Let me start with the top of the list. I'm going to run through the 7 names, just tell you who they are. The first name is the only person who did not write a book. He actually has written a book. It just wasn't on Bitcoin. His name is Michael Saylor, Saylor. He's probably the biggest voice in Bitcoin. He's the CEO of a publicly traded company that 5 years ago, after having been in business for something like 30 years, made a significant change in the company. All he did was he took the cash out of the corporate treasury and replaced it with Bitcoin. As a result, the stock has skyrocketed, and he's doing all kinds of interesting things with fixed income products. They just issued a preferred stock that's paying 10%. So I would encourage you to not only search for Michael Saylor on YouTube, but likewise, look up his company, MicroStrategy, ticker MSTR. They have recently changed their name of their company to just Strategy. So if you go to strategy.com, you're going to get MicroStrategy or Michael Saylor type stuff. But he's the top name. If I'm going to recommend on any of these names that when you search for them on YouTube, and I would start with YouTube rather than reading books, at least that's what I did. It gets you into this curriculum very quickly. And then at the end, I'll talk to you about how you can rotate the names. Every time you sit down, look for something new. But the one tip I will give you is I recommend that when you look up a name on YouTube, let's say Michael Saylor, put in videos that exceed 20 minutes in length. I notice in the shorter videos, these are sometimes other websites that selectively edit these people. But if you look for content for any of these 7 names that exceeds 20 minutes, it'll be more of a long-form interview. These people like Michael Saylor will have a chance to make a point and actually work it through with you. So that's my number 1 recommendation on any of these names. Listen to videos that are at least 20 minutes in length. Many of them are like an hour long because they're interviews, and many of these podcasts are 1-hour interviews. But anything over 20 minutes is the best. Now, Michael Saylor is the one that came up with this 100 hours. So if you're wondering, Mark, where did you come up with the 100 hours criteria? Michael Saylor said something that really resonated with me in my Bitcoin journey. What he said was, if you just do 20 or 25 hours of study on Bitcoin, you think you know everything, and you're almost always wrong. It's not until you get to 100 hours not to truly have mastered the topic of Bitcoin. I have 1,000 hours into studying Bitcoin, and I still am not feeling I mastered the topic. But at 100 hours, I would agree with him. At that point, that's when I first started realizing a lot of my premises were incorrect. The assumptions I was making about Bitcoin, I misunderstood certain fundamental things. I would agree. That's why 100 hours is important. So Michael Saylor is the number one name. Number two name is Lyn Alden, Lynalden. And this list is in the description below. Lyn is an investment strategist, but she will really resonate with financial advisors because of her economic perspective on everything. She's very measured, just like Michael, and she walks through her logic in what I think is an airtight way. So in listening to Lyn, you understand the problem and how Bitcoin solves it from an economics standpoint. The third name is Larry Lepard, or Lawrence Lepard. Larry Lepard has been a fund manager in the traditional financial services industry. I don't want to insult him, but I'm going to guess 30, 40 years. He's been around, and he wrote a book that has taken Bitcoin by storm called The Big Print. When we get down to all the books, I will cover that. But what I liked about Lepard is when he is being interviewed, he explains Bitcoin from a financial advisor's perspective. I think you will love Lepard in all his interviews because he really does explain things from an industry standpoint that will resonate with you. The fourth name is Parker Lewis. Now, Parker Lewis is also an industry guy, also here in Texas. I think he was in Dallas, now living in Austin. But again, another industry guy, and he focuses on explaining the currency value and the idea of Bitcoin as a means of exchange. Nobody explains it, in my opinion, better than him. Parker Lewis is going to be very understandable to financial advisors because he comes from our industry, like some of the others. Number 5 name on the list is Alex Gladstein. Now, he is not from our industry. What he is an expert at is the use of Bitcoin and the adoption of Bitcoin, not in the first world, like US, Europe, big nations with big economies. No, we look at the world from a certain point of view. He's looking at Bitcoin as it's being used in some of the fastest growing adoption areas, which is developing nations, especially countries that are under authoritarian or countries where their currency is crap. It's just 35, 45, 105% inflation. I think in a big economy like the US, we don't stop to think about how would I deal with the issue of inflation if my local currency was dropping in value 100% every year, or it was dropping a third or 2/3 every year. Alex is an expert on that and how Bitcoin's being used to help some of the most desperate people on earth have a decent chance at a decent life. Number 6 on the list is Jeff Booth. Jeff Booth is Canadian. He's from Vancouver. And I think Jeff, for me, is the biggest thinker in Bitcoin. He really thinks about Bitcoin and what's possible from a much higher level than anybody else in the Bitcoin community, with the possible exception of Michael Saylor. I think part of it is which personality resonates with you the most. Jeff Booth's background, as far as I understand, he was a highly successful real estate developer in British Columbia. He became a venture capitalist in technology companies, so he's got a technology background. I think Jeff Booth puts a picture on Bitcoin that, if you're anything like me, it'll blow your mind if you really think about what he's talking about. And last but not least, in many ways, number 7 could be the number 1 name. In my mind, he's one of the clearest, most coherent voices for Bitcoin from a pure economic standpoint. The name is Saif Ammous. He wrote a book called The Bitcoin Standard. It is the textbook across the industry. If you just read one book, I think most Bitcoiners would tell you to read The Bitcoin Standard. Saifedean lives not in the US, I think he's originally from Palestine and he's maybe living in Jordan. He's lived in Lebanon, but he's from that area of the world. However, he was trained in economics at Columbia. He got his PhD in economics. I think from a pure economic standpoint, he helps work through all the economic questions and issues as to how this might work, its effect and impact on the economy. There is no name that's clearer when it comes to economics and Bitcoin. So I'm going to run through these names again, or at least 6 of them, and tell you the books that they wrote, because I want you to categorize these books the way I'm describing it. I have these books categorized in 3 categories. You have books about the problem. So what is the problem that Bitcoin resolves? For financial advisors, this is really critical because the problem that Bitcoin solves is one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest risks that we all face as financial advisors planning for affluent ideal clients. And that is, you have a client that says, I've accumulated money and I just want to keep it. I don't want it eroded by inflation or purchasing power. I worked hard for this money. I want to keep it. And that's the problem. In the US dollar, the value of the dollar has been consistently, my whole lifetime, dropping in value 50% every 10 years. So it's got a half-life of 10 years. So these books on the problem, I have books on Bitcoin as a solution, and then I have books on the adoption of Bitcoin. How is this going to actually work its way into the current system? So the problem, the solution, and adoption. I've put 2 books in each of these categories. What are the 2 books that describe the problem that we're facing in a way that financial advisors will immediately grasp? I see why this is useful as a planning tool, this Bitcoin. Lawrence Lepard wrote this book I mentioned called The Big Print. That's the book that describes the problem extraordinarily well. The other book, the name Lyn Alden, the Bitcoin analyst that I mentioned, she wrote, I think, the other great book on defining the problem, but more from a technical standpoint, the way economists look at it, and financial advisors are often very technical in the way we think. So Lawrence Lepard, who is an industry guy, gives the history of the problem brilliantly. And Lyn Alden has a book called Broken Money, which explains why the fiat currency system led by the US dollar is not working and it's breaking apart slowly. The second set of books is the category Bitcoin as a solution to the problem. The first book on that list I've already mentioned. It's The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean. He's written a trilogy of books. The Bitcoin Standard, which is the textbook for Bitcoin. The Fiat Standard, which goes with it. It explains the issues with and problems with the fiat system. And then he's got a new book called The Gold Standard, which is fiction, but it plays this thought game. What if we had stayed on the gold standard? And how would that have unfolded? Those are his 3 books, but the book that describes Bitcoin as the solution is The Bitcoin Standard. The second book that really lays out why Bitcoin is the solution is Jeff Booth. He wrote a book called The Price of Tomorrow. Interestingly, it only has 1 paragraph in the whole book about Bitcoin. The rest of the book is about how deflation is the natural state of the free market. When you read that book, I'm saying the 2 books together, The Bitcoin Standard and The Price of Tomorrow, you'll understand how Bitcoin is a solution to this problem of inflation. Then finally, the books on adoption. It seems as though Bitcoin is barely being used right now. Like, why aren't we using it when we buy lunch at a restaurant? Why isn't everybody taking Bitcoin? You need to understand the adoption curve. After 16 years of Bitcoin, it is growing exponentially, but you're just in the beginning of this movement. It's just now starting to break out into institutional and sovereign government adoption of Bitcoin. This is when things really explode. So for the advisors out there who are thinking, I'm late, even if my clients were to buy a little bit of Bitcoin, it's too expensive. We missed the big run up. Oh, you need to understand that we are at the very ground level, that you're early, if anything, not late. Plus the fact that Bitcoin doesn't operate that way. It doesn't get too high. It's driven by other things. So the 2 books on adoption that I'm recommending is number one of the 6 names that I mentioned before, Parker Lewis. He wrote a book called Gradually, Then Suddenly. This is a really important book if you like to read books. Where the title came from was there were 2 characters talking in an old Ernest Hemingway novel, and one character was telling the other character that he had just declared bankruptcy, and the other character said, "How did that happen?" And the guy thought for a minute, and he said, "Gradually, and then suddenly." So Parker took that title, and this is what we're experiencing with Bitcoin. It's going very gradually, but then it's going to be suddenly, according to his thesis. The other book on adoption is called Check Your Financial Privilege by Alex Gladstein. So Alex is the head of the Human Rights Foundation, and what you will learn in that book is how this exponential adoption of Bitcoin over the last 16 years has really initiated in smaller, more desperate economies where they really need a way to escape their local currency. He has a book called Check Your Financial Privilege, and I recommend you start there. But if you're not the type to read books, I'm always hesitant giving out a book list because so few people read books anymore, myself included. I do love to read books, but where I started on this Bitcoin journey was on YouTube. You just don't want to watch the wrong people. So be careful who you curate and watch on YouTube. I would recommend sticking to this list of 7 names. And when you sit down, you've blocked time on your schedule to learn a little something about Bitcoin. When you pull up YouTube, just rotate these names. Search filter 20 minutes or longer. Find some topic because they all have 100 hours of every topic you can imagine on Bitcoin. Just scroll through the titles, pick the one that resonates with you that day. And I recommend starting with YouTube. And at some point, if there's something about Bitcoin, either the problem, the way it's stated that Bitcoin solves, or Bitcoin itself, how the network works, or the adoption curve. If you really get interested in any of those 3 categories, then read the book. I would say read the book if you like to read books, but you could put in 1,000 hours in just YouTube. The big warning is to make sure that you don't listen to people that don't know what they're talking about. So that's it. That's my curriculum recommendation for financial advisors to learn about Bitcoin. Stick with these 7 names, rotate the names, find longer form interviews, and anything they have to say is going to be worth hearing. We'd love to work with you in our program. We have a community that's chatting about Bitcoin and financial planning. Bitcoin is one of these things that will be an inflection point in our industry. It will ultimately change everything in the financial services industry, even if it's just as a digital asset, even if it doesn't take over as the world reserve currency. After I did a deep dive, I realized that Bitcoin has a shot at changing literally everything that we do in the financial services industry. So the idea is just commit the time now while you're early in this adoption of Bitcoin to master the topic so that if someone comes in and they're testing your knowledge because maybe they invested $2,000 in Bitcoin 5 years ago because maybe their son or daughter twisted their arm to buy it. Now it's worth $2 or $3 million, and they come and they test you with a question about Bitcoin. Better to remain silent than try to fake it when it comes to Bitcoin. All Bitcoiners are going to test your knowledge, and if you're in our program, we're going to commit to making sure that when you do put in your 100 hours of mastery of the topic, I want to make sure you have 1,000 hours of knowledge because everything I'm putting in front of people in our program are specifically focused on financial advisor applications and warnings, lots of due diligence and compliance issues. But in our program, we're going to focus the learning on Bitcoin around financial advisors working in our industry. So however you decide to invest your 100 hours learning about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin network, I wish you well, and we'll see you in the next video.